Okay, hello, welcome everybody to whatever I called this, Accelerationist Power Hour. I've never done a live stream before, so struggle with me through this learning experience. I was gonna do a 1K live stream because you guys are awesome and you are obviously into this kind of stuff. I was planning on reading Meltdown for it. I thought that would be kind of fun. And then last night we got this very interesting article published by Vox, and I'd been wanting to actually talk about an earlier article that had been published that was pretty similar with the accusations and stuff like that. And I figured this would just be, I might as well, right? I might as well take the time. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible to try to get to Meltdown. Oh, am I only coming out of one ear? Okay, wait, let me try to fix that. Uh, Yeah, it would probably just be headphones that will. Okay, I don't know actually know how to fix that if I'm routing it through OBS. If anyone has any tips on how to change stereo to mono on OBS, otherwise, change your headphones to mono or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'm actually gonna do. We're gonna read the whole Vox article, and I'm gonna discuss it and just talk about sort of my takes on why it just doesn't land as a real criticism of accelerationism. So that's what we're gonna get into right off the bat here. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through it quick enough to do some meltdown. If not, we can always do meltdown on another stream or something like that, because this just kind of came out of nowhere. I know it's I couldn't even make it through the article. This is like I tried to read it last night. I made it through, I don't know, probably not even half of it before I just had to rage quit. And I so we're going to try to do this together. No guarantees on if we make it to the end here. So the thing that gets me right off the bat, and this was the same with the other article that I had read about it too, that it was earlier. I can't remember what it was called. They act like it's like a revelation, like they figured out some secret. He's dug into the most violent white supremacists and he's connected all the dots. Okay, so this isn't just an opinion piece. This is like a revolutionary, like revelatory piece of journalism, supposedly. Okay, let's blow this. Sorry about that. One sec, you guys. Okay, see, it's a learning experience, and we're getting through this together. Okay, so yeah, the audio is trying to save us exactly. Accelerationism, the obscure idea inspiring white supremacist killers around the world. How a techno capitalist philosophy morphed into a justification for murder. So they're starting off already with just a direct comparison between accelerationism and white supremacy, which off the bat, again, if you've done research on accelerationism, it started off in a very leftist, very the opposite of fascism. I mean, Anti-Oedipus, the introduction to it, Michel Foucault calls it like the introduction to the non-fascist life or something like that. It's a very far cry from the beginning, but okay, let's get into it. Obviously, he must have done some great journalism to get to this conclusion, so let's keep going. Blaise Bernstein, age 19 at the time of his murder, loved to cook. Before he traveled back to his home in California for the winter break, the University of Pennsylvania sophomore had been elected manager editor of a campus cooking publication called Pen Appetit. It's a position he never ended up filling. So it starts off with this, I don't even know why it starts off this way, but it starts off talking about this murder of this young Jewish man. It's an attack by the Atomwaffen division, it's a white supremacist group, terrorist group. They're very big into killing people, causing strife. The local Jewish community celebrated the memory by, the cooking school, whatever. Atomwaff celebrated it as well by putting the guy who did it, the murderer, on a T-shirt. Again, starting off with this, technically Atomwaffen, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think they have ever talked about accelerationism in any sort of real sense. I mean, they talk about killing to cause political distress, to try to, take advantage of that. But that's not a very new idea. So, I don't know. Again, the journalism's coming, I'm sure. Let's keep going. Bernstein's slaying 2018 marked the beginning of an extraordinary period of white supremacist violence, a spate of murders and mass shootings that has continued through this year. The October 2018 shooting at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue was the deadliest act of anti-Semitic violence in American history. So now it goes into obviously the synagogue attack. The March 2019 attack on mosques. So this one here, the New Zealand one, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a lot here, but the New Zealand attack is the only attack, as far as I know, again, please inform me if I'm wrong in the comments here, guys, that was actually directly used the word acceleration, okay? And he used the word accelerationism in his manifesto. He uses the word once. It's like a 74-page manifesto. He uses the word once in a title, and he says that he uses acceleration in the sense that by using a gun, he accelerates them banning guns quicker in New Zealand, something along those lines. So this is the one connection, as far as I know, in writing, in theoretical terms, between white supremacy and accelerationism, is this one guy, Brendan Tarrant, the New Zealand shooter, who put it in his manifesto. Now, if you've read the manifesto, and I did actually read the manifesto, it's not very well written, okay? It's not Ted Kaczynski style work of actual theory that was promoted by violence. It's basically just ramblings and memes. It's the kind of stuff, you would think you would read on 4chan. It's not the type of stuff you would read in, again, accelerationist literature. And it doesn't reference any accelerationist literature. It doesn't reference Nick Land. It doesn't reference Deleuze or anything like that. Okay, so eventually he's going to get to accelerationism here. These killings were often linked to the alt-right, described as an outgrowth of the movement's rise in the Trump era. But many of these suspected killers, from Atomwaffen thugs to the New Zealand mosque shooter to the Poway synagogue shooter, are more tightly connected to the newer and more radical white supremacist ideology, one that dismisses the alt-rights as cowards, unwilling to take the matters into their own hands. It's called accelerationism. So, okay, let me just try to read this again. So it's a radical white supremacist ideology which dismisses the alt-right as cowards, unwilling to take the matters into their own hands. That's not even in Brendan Tarrant's manifesto. So, where are they getting this? Is there any source for this? I've never read this in anything. And again, I read the manifesto. So, yes. Audible suffering is going on right now. It's called accelerationism, and it rests on the idea that Western governments are irreparably corrupt. Again, can I have a source here? Because this isn't something that I've read before in all my accelerationist readings. I don't even think that was necessarily Brendan Tarrant's idea. He wanted to cause strife, obviously, through his terrorism, to enact political goals, but that's just terrorism. I mean, the anarchists in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were killing people to try to get their political goals enacted. I've never heard an accelerationist refer to them as proto-accelerationist or anything. Have you just basically just redefined terrorism as accelerationism? Now, any act of terrorism must be accelerationist because make things bad so they get better? I mean, again, audible suffering. Accelerationist ideas have been cited in mass shooters' manifestos, explicitly in the case of the New Zealand killer, and are frequently referenced in white supremacist web forums and chat rooms. So again, this is a nice little bit of rhetoric here that you can pass by. Accelerationist ideas have been cited in mass shooters' manifestos, not accelerationism. Because again, only explicitly was that in the New Zealand Killer's manifesto, and only once, okay? So these accelerationist ideas that he's talking about are the ones he just came up with. That you need to, what was it? Dismiss the alt-right as cowards, take the matters into your own hands, to overthrow corrupt Western governments. He's basically just stated what he thinks accelerationism is, and then said, oh, look, I found all these ideas in these shooters' manifestos. Meanwhile, that's not what accelerationism is. You skipped the whole idea of actually trying to figure out what accelerationism is, and you've decided that it's a weird circle. You've read those ideas into the works, you've decided that they're accelerationist ideas, and then you've decided that those people must be accelerationists because they're using those ideas. But it's very disconnected from reality. Accelerationists reject any effort to seize political power through the ballot box, dismissing the alt-right's attempts to engage in mass politics as pointless. If one votes, one should vote for the most extreme candidate, left or right, to intensify points of political and social conflict within Western societies. So I actually have heard this mentioned as accelerationist praxis before, to vote in a candidate that would cause the most tension in society. I don't really see it as very effective. It seems like much more like radical Marxism sort of, take on it. And really, again, it's not something that is very deeply entrenched in accelerationist theory. I mean, Zizek was actually accused of being accelerationist recently because he came out and supported Donald Trump in the 2016 elections with the idea that it would embolden or open the space for a more radical left in the United States. And Zizek's not an accelerationist, so it just seems like it's an idea that's out there, and accelerationism has dealt with it before, but I wouldn't say it's explicitly accelerationist. Again, no sources on these things. He's just sort of stating what he believes accelerationism is without... I would be really curious to know what the email he got from Nick Land said, because I'm guessing it didn't say this. Their preferred tactic for heightening these contradictions, however, is not voting, but violence. Again, please give me a source for that, because it seems to be coming out of your ass. Attacking racial minorities and Jews as a way of bringing us closer to race war, and using firearms to spark divisive fights over gun control. Divisive fights, sorry. Okay, I don't know if you guys have seen that Dreg song. I can't really understand Dreg. I don't understand his comedy. I don't know how many levels of irony he's on. But I swear that would be the citation he has for this, is that meme song on YouTube. I mean... Anyways, okay, so now he's getting into his real journalism on accelerationism. Here we go. Accelerationism has bizarre roots in academia. Period. But as strange as the racist movement's intellectual history may be, you haven't told us anything about it. You just said it has bizarre roots in academia. Experts believe it has played a significant and underappreciated role in the current wave of extremist violence. Okay, so what expert did they find? An investigative researcher at the Anti-Defamation League. So they chose somebody at the Anti-Defamation League whose role would obviously be researching, hate symbols and stuff like that. They probably don't have a very deep background in like French cybernetic theory, anything like that. Bataille or Kant or Spinoza. But they know enough to say it's not an ideology that exists in a theoretical sense. It's an ideology that actually has manifested in real-world violence. So, what does that mean? An ideology that... It's not an ideology that exists in a theoretical sense. I've thought about that line pretty much nonstop since I read it. What does that mean? I don't even know what she's trying to say. Is she trying to say that there is no theory behind accelerationism? Because accelerationism is characterized almost exclusively by having dense theory. Does it mean it doesn't exist in a theoretical sense, in that theoretically the ideology of accelerationism doesn't exist? Because, I mean, in that sense I would sort of agree, but then she says it is an ideology that has actually manifested in real-world violence. So, again, I really have trouble with this quote, because it doesn't actually make any sense to me, even like just from a general, like, trying to read English sense. It's not an ideology that exists in a theoretical sense. I have no idea what that point's supposed to be. The earliest version of accelerationism was, ironically enough, in some ways a celebration of the status quo. Again, please give me a quote on some of these things, because, like, I think it's supposed to be read as, it's not an ideology that exists only in a theoretical sense. Sorry. It's not an ideology that exists in a theoretical sense. It's not, it exists only in a theoretical. A very charitable reading of that sentence that makes it somewhat better. Yeah, I guess that's true. If it doesn't have theory, you don't have to cite anything. Maybe it's sort of like a roundabout way to skip real critique. As long as you can say there is no theory here, then why would you have to deal with the theory? That kind of makes sense. So they say that the accelerationism at the beginning was a celebration of the status quo. I'm thinking this is like the critique that I sometimes see by people who don't really understand accelerationism, that think it's basically just like neoliberalism, but like a cult neoliberalism or something like that. Again, there's no explanation for it, and there's no citation, so I don't really know what he's getting at when he says it ironically enough started as a celebration of the status quo. The mainstream ethos of the 1990s was thoroughly capitalist, the collapse of the Soviet Union creating a sense that blah, blah, blah. This coincided with technological revolution, the rise of widespread internet access, and the birth of mass internet culture, a sense of the world defined by and connected through technology in previously incomprehensible ways. Was that the status quo, though, or was that sort of like the breaking of the status quo that was being... Like these radical ideas of, K-pulp and it doesn't quite sound like the status quo of the 90s, but what do I know? At the University of Warwick, a relatively new but well-regarded English university, a young philosophy professor named Nick Land argued that the triumph of capitalism and the rise of technoculture were inexplicably intertwined. Drawing on the work of famously dense continental theorists like Gilles Deleuze, Félix Guattari, Jean-François Lyotard, Land argued that capitalist technological advancement was transforming not just our societies, but our very selves. The self, he believed, was being dissolved by the increased speed and pace of modern life. The individual was becoming less important than the techno-capitalist system it found itself in. So the self being dissolved by the increasing speed, it's hard to characterize Land's thought in a singular way, because if you read different periods of his work, he obviously has different ideas. But coming out of Bataille, it was much more, I think, that the self never really existed, right? It was more of a rejection of that altogether. But this is kind of nitpicky stuff, so I can understand misunderstanding that. Ultimately, this take, probably the best take that I've read so far. The individual becoming less important than the techno-capitalist system it found itself in. I'll give him 1 point for that. He gets 1. Modernity has capitalism, the self-escalating techno-commercial complex, as its motor, Land wrote in an email to Vox in its characteristically cryptic style. One question was what the process wants, i.e. spontaneously promotes, and what resistance it provokes. The we he's referring to is the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, it goes into the CCRU. So this email that they reference, I really want to read it. I really do, because I love that he says characteristically cryptic when modernity has capitalism as its motor. Like, if you ignore the little things in the brackets there, our question is what the process wants and what resistance it provokes. That's not very cryptic. That seems like a very simple idea, but maybe he got thrown off by the stuff in the brackets and just kind of gave up. The we he's referring to is the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, the CCRU, a group of work, faculty members, and graduate students who worked with Land to examine the questions that would come to define this early accelerationism. The writing that came out of CCRU's work has a hallucinatory, ethereal quality that makes it hard to figure out exactly what they're trying to say. Land's marquee book is titled Fake Noumena. It also feels very of its time. CCRU members obsessed over electronica and used the word cyber a lot, all conveying a sense of a society rapidly accelerating towards an exciting future. All conveying a sense of a society rapidly... Isn't that a rejection of the status quo? That society is going to be left behind by this exciting future? Anyways, the CCRU was a fount of mad energy, obsessed with the pace of life under late capitalism. Its members had utter disregard for traditional academic norms about scholarship and behavior. This could not last long. The CCRU split from work and... okay. So now he's just going to start explaining... This is, I think, right about where I gave up, actually. I didn't even make it that far. According to Annie Beckett, a journalist who chronicled the CCRU's rise and fall in The Guardian, Land and his remaining followers moved into a home in Leamington, formerly owned by prominent British Satanist... Aleister Crowley, part of an obsession with the occult that had flourished in the accelerationist ranks. Beckett describes a psychologically tortured group that would scribble strange diagrams on the walls of Crowley's former home. That sounds awesome. In Fang Noumena, Land describes his tool of choice during its darkest period as the sacred substance amphetamine. After perhaps a year of fantastical abuse, I was, by any reasonable standards, profoundly insane. So, it's not a very useful breakdown on Nick Land, and it seems to try to frame him more as crazy than, an actually quite influential thinker. But he did do a lot of drugs, and he was pretty crazy, so I'll give it to him. After the CCRU's collapse, its members spread across British academia, as well as the fields ranging from journalism to music production. Its ideas rose to prominence again in the early 2010s, taking two separate and opposed political turns. One wing was left-wing and academic, a school of Marxist thought focusing on how technology can be conscripted towards building a post-capitalist future. The other was right-wing and, in major part, a product of Nick Land's mind. So I'm guessing he's just basically just saying there's LAC and RAC. So, LAC and RAC, they're not really... Like, UAC is sort of the main thrust of accelerationism today, as far as I can see. LAC and RAC are kind of fringe, I would say. At least much more fringe than UAC. But I guess it turned into two separate political turns. Again, there's no theory here. It's only the politics. It's only the enacting of violence. How does the enacting of violence, by the way, since we've already established that that's what it's about, how does that play into the left-wing academic Marxist school of thought? Because at least they haven't referred to any or alluded to any Marxist academics who are advocating violence to overthrow society. But okay, moving on. After his breakdown, Land moved to China, and became enamored with his techno-authoritarian political system. He worked as a journalist, reporting uncritically and favorably on the Chinese regime's accomplishments. When I asked him which politicians he admired, he said he's not huge on political figures on the scene today. However, he added that the Singaporean technocratic authoritarian Lee Kuan Yew and former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping were greats. I don't know what that would have to do with white supremacy, but okay. Land turned this admiration for technocratic strongmen into an entire political ideology, linking up online with the Silicon Valley entrepreneur Curtis Yarvin, who writes under the pen name Mencius Moldbug. He helped construct the doctrine of neo-reaction, or NRX, essentially an argument that democracy had outlived its usefulness. In his 2013 series of essays on the topic, titled The Dark Enlightenment, Land argues that the ideal state is a capitalist monarchy described as GovCorp, the state controlled by an authoritarian CEO organizing policy according to the dictates of a rational corporate governance. It was essentially a hard-right spin on accelerationism. Was it, though? I mean, I understand that they kind of go hand in hand, like RAC and Patchwork, but does Patchwork, like, does neo-reaction at its base, is it accelerationist? I'm not asking that as a real question. Like, I've never really considered, I always considered them two sort of separate but coexisting ideas. I've never really considered neo-reactionism explicitly accelerationist. Again, maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm not big on NRX, so. Neo-reactionaries argued that the egalitarian and democratic policies described as progressive by left liberals are in fact a way of slowing down the only progress worth having, acceleration towards techno-capitalist singularity. Is it techno-capitalist singularity they're after, or is it the monarchy? Is it the GovCorp? Because I don't think GovCorp, when Nick Land writes it, is the same as when he writes techno-capitalist singularity. Neo-reaction is accelerationism with a flat tire, Land wrote in 2013 blog post. Okay, well, so Nick Land at least connects them in that sense. Besides the speed machine or industrial capitalism, there is an ever more perfectly weighted decelerator. Comically, the fabrication of this braking mechanism is proclaimed as progress. It is the great work of the left. So I guess neo-reaction is the accelerationist answer to the flat tire that is the cathedral. I think that's what he's trying to say. Though NRX has no mainstream proponents, it does have connections to prominent figures. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon has reportedly read neo-reactionary literature, and Trump-backing venture capitalist Peter Thiel's fund-supported Moldbunk's tech startup Urbit. I think he's not even with Urbit anymore. In emails to right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos obtained by BuzzFeed. Wow, they cited Milo in this. Of all the things... Okay, anyways. Moldbug claimed to be coaching Thiel, telling Yiannopoulos that he watched the 2016 election at Thiel's house. He's fully enlightened. Like, I think that the connection between the right and NRX, there actually would be a lot of interesting things to say here. To tie it all just directly back to white supremacist terrorism feels very ham-fisted, I suppose, to put it lightly. But I think there is actually, this would have been a better article to actually just dive into NRX and look at NRX and how NRX has influenced the politics on the right, and how people have, it's not actually an alt-right ideology as far as Nick Land is concerned, that's for sure. He considers NRX as actually like predicted, he said something like it predicted the rise of the alt-right in a horrified sense. So yeah, that is what it is. There's the alt-right right after I said that. Neo-Nazi accelerationism and the alt-right. The extreme right-wing internet is a small place. The rise of neo-reaction inevitably led it to cross paths with another online fringe movement in 2010s, the alt-right. Members of these two movements didn't agree on everything. While Land and Moldbug valorize capitalism and see democracy as the major barrier to a better future, alt-right ideologues like Richard Spencer and Jared Taylor valorize whiteness and see Jews and non-whites as the problem. Okay, I want to read that again just so I understand exactly what he's trying to say. Members of the two movements... Okay, so he's just saying that neo-reactionary thinkers and alt-right thinkers didn't agree. Okay. Nonetheless, the two shared core ideas, like the emphasis on the role of genetics in creating human hierarchies. They actually really disagree on the role of genetics in human hierarchies, and they're quite open about their disagreements on that, but I disagree with both of those groups on that, so whatever. Although I'm not a white nationalist, I'm not exactly allergic to the stuff, as Moldbug once put it. Again, Moldbug is not is Moldbug an accelerationist? Can we say that? I would never say that. I would say he's neo-reactionary. Maybe I'm wrong. The result is considerable cross-pollination between neo-reactionaries and the alt-right. Did I miss something there? I feel like that was a bit of a jump there. Moldbug once said he's not allergic to white nationalism, and Land is more critical about it. And the result of that is a considerable cross-pollination between neo-reactionaries and the alt-right. Okay. I feel like you could have done a little more digging. I feel like that's a pretty tenuous connection you've asserted there. They disagreed with each other, but at one point Moldbug said he wasn't allergic to this one set of ideas, therefore the alt-right. And anyways, ideas and terminology cross the different group lines. Some fringe influencers, such as the YouTuber Colin Robertson, I don't actually know him, have described themselves as being both neo-reactionaries and members of the alt-right. Notably not an accelerationist, it seems. A 2018 Southern Poverty Law Center investigation found that the several posters on the alt-right, the Right Stuff and alt-right website were heavily influenced by neo-reaction. Many of the ideologies, okay. It make me open to Hitlerism. It makes me think that this is just somebody trolling this journalist here. Do people say Hitlerism unironically? Is that a thing? I don't know. I don't spend enough time on these websites. This is most likely... Okay, this is most likely the means through which the racist movement became introduced to the term accelerationism. There's no meaningful use of the term or attention paid to Land among America's racists prior to the alt-right's encounter with the Dark Enlightenment. And why would there have been? An abstruse techno-capitalist philosophy seems to have little in common with the Herrenvolk hatred of the KKK. It wasn't until the rise of neo-reaction and the alt-right, two very online movements that shared members in common, that the encounter would have happened. It's somewhat ironic then that accelerationism has... But didn't they say at the beginning that accelerationism was an ideology that has no theory and that was only about like violence and stuff? But he's pretty much like disagreeing with himself at this point, is he not? By saying that the only reason that, you know, these violent people were introduced to accelerationism was through this tenuous connection through neo-reactionary theory? Like, am I having trouble like following these lines of logic? Is it my fault here, or is it actually just kind of all over the place? It's somewhat ironic then that acceleration has displaced the alt-right in the eyes of many internet racists. Has it? Like, again, maybe I'm not spending time on these like deep neo-Nazi websites where they're all talking about accelerationism, but I usually don't see it. Like, it's not very popular in general, let alone like taken over the alt-right, you know, sphere. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Like, I feel like as somebody who does accelerationist videos on YouTube, like there isn't all that much content out there. Meanwhile, alt-right content, there's a ton of alt-right, like there's tons of right-wing content out there, and so little of that overlaps with the accelerationist stuff that I pay attention to. Maybe I'm just out of touch. I'm turning into a boomer. This is what this article makes me feel like. I feel like I'm such a boomer that like I have like the boomer accelerationist ideas, and now all like the new accelerationist ideas, they outpassed me, and everyone's just saying this whole article could just be summed up as just saying "okay, boomer" to me, and I would feel the exact same. In popular usage, the alt-right is generally taken to refer to racists on the internet. That's actually a bit imprecise. The alt-right is a specific subset of online racists. It's not all racists, it's specific racists, ones that believe white nationalism can triumph by trolling journalists and staging real-life demonstrations in Charlottesville. The basic model is Hitler and the Nazi Party. Okay, I'm always interested to hear definitions of movements like this. So this is a new one for me, I think. It's white nationalists who explicitly believe that trolling journalists and staging real-life demonstrations like Charlottesville, and they base their model on Hitler and the Nazi Party. I'm trying to tie that in any possible sense to accelerationism right now, and I'm literally just like drawing blanks. My brain is fizzling right now. If you're hearing silence, it's me just trying to process exactly like where these lines of argument in this article are supposed to line up. I guess they even say right there, like, the basic model of Hitler and the Nazi Party is the whole democratic election and inaccurate goals, which they said that. Didn't they say that accelerationism disagreed with that whole premise, that the idea of that you need violence, not democracy or something? He can't even follow his own, like, I'm trying to follow his assertions through the article, right? He says acceleration is this. Does he keep referring to accelerationism as this throughout the article? And he doesn't. He just seems to be switching it up, you know? Okay, let's keep going though. This has been a controversial strategy in the neo-Nazi community. It had been tried before in the 1950s and 1960s by the American Nazi Party, whose charismatic leader, George Lincoln Rockwell, attempted to turn it into a legitimate force. Rockwell staged a rally on the National Mall, demonstrated against civil rights, and planned marches through Jewish neighborhoods on Jewish holidays. This amounted to very little politically, and in 1967, Rockwell was assassinated by a former member of his own party. The alt-right's leaders believed the time was right for another try, in large part thanks to Donald Trump and the internet. So the alt-right is a direct continuation of George Lincoln Rockwell. Okay. Again, maybe I don't know anything about the alt-right. Like, it's a very mysterious thing to me. The alt-right is always one of those things where the word gets thrown around so much, people use it in so many ways. Having somebody describe at least how they're using it, it's actually quite helpful to me. So thank you for this breakdown, Vox. Trump is seen by the alt-right not as a crypto-Nazi, but as an outsider sympathetic to white nationalist goals. He served as a figurehead, a rallying point that could help them convert large numbers of Americans to their cause. The internet allowed them to try out their message with mass audiences. Memes and trolling and message boards allowed them to bypass media gatekeepers and reach Trump fans who might be receptive to white nationalist ideas directly. Indeed, the combination of Trump's rise and the alt-right online activity did swell the movement's ranks considerably. We'll be getting back to accelerationism at some point in this article, I hope. The 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia was supposed to be proof of concept, a demonstration that the pro-Trump shitpost could be turned into a real-world political movement. What actually happened was a wave of national revulsion and backlash, particularly after the murder of counter-protester Heather Heyer by a white nationalist. The alt-right lost access to social media platforms, was hounded out of public demonstrations by Antifa, and univocally denounced by virtually everyone in American politics except Trump. The second Unite the Right rally held in DC 2018 was a pathetically low turnout affair. So I'm so not interested in reading about the alt-right and neo-Nazis. Like, if they were going to try to tie it to accelerationism, but at this point they're just giving you a breakdown of like what happened in Charlottesville, which is just this is all accelerationism. I'm so lost. Okay, we're gonna skip some of this stuff because it does. Okay, here we go. I saw the word accelerate. Their main inspiration on how to accelerate this process came from James Mason, a previously unheralded neo-Nazi writer who produced a newsletter called Siege in the 1980s. In Siege, Mason uses the collapse of George Lincoln Rockwell's political strategy to claim that any attempt to work within the parameters of normal politics was doomed to failure. A better approach, he argued, was pioneered by serial killer Charles Manson, a correspondent of Mason's who deeply influenced his theories on Siege. But wasn't this all? This was all pre, like, CCRU. So if this is where they're getting their accelerationist ideas, and it has nothing to do with accelerationism, did you read this when you put it in here that they took all these ideas from Siege? I haven't read Siege, but if that's true, it kind of hurts your argument, doesn't it? Anyways, the murders committed by Manson and his disciples served in his mind as a model of decentralized violent action that would be hard for authorities to stop. If neo-Nazis emulated Manson on an individual level, killed and tortured select targets, eventually they could help spur a white uprising against the system, accelerate the pace of societal collapse already made inevitable by Jewish and non-white corruption, and set the stage for its replacement by a Fourth Reich. If I were asked by anyone of my opinion on what to look for or hope next, I would tell them of wave of killings or assassinations of system. Is he quoting Charles Manson or Mason here? Oh, it's Mason. Okay. System bureaucrats by roving gunmen who have their strategy well mapped out in advance and well nigh impossible to stop. His greatest concern must be to pick his targets well so that his act may speak so clearly for... Okay. Again, the fact that you're quoting these ideas as, like, accelerationist, and they're explicitly not accelerationist, they're from Mason's Siege. Again, I'm having such trouble following this. Esoteric Masonism, yeah. Esoteric Mansonism, yeah. Both, I guess. I guess it's both. In the 1980s, land retroactively created Siege. Yeah, I guess this is time loops, right? This is like teleoplexy or something. Mason is still alive today. He lives in Denver and looks like blah, blah, blah. Interestingly, he's not an explicit accelerationist. Okay. The alt-right was buckling under post-Charlottesville strains. The phrase "Read Siege" became a meme they published on social media. Atomwaff and okay. Adherents would meet up at physical hate camps, practice with rifles, to plan their next move. Accelerationist ideas flourish separately on social media platforms and extremist web forums like 8chan and Fascist Forge, reaching neo-Nazi groups around the globe. The dedication of violence in accelerationist spaces is scary. They openly fantasize about the need to kill Jews. Whoa! Did he mean accelerationist or like these Nazi Atomwaffen groups? They openly fantasize about the need to kill Jews and non-whites and even celebrate ideologically opposed acts of violence like Islamic terrorist attacks as blowing against what? Really? Was any of this in the Nick Land article? Like, again, what did Nick Land write to him? Nick Land, I almost guarantee you, did not write that he is dedicated to the open fantasies of murdering Jews and non-whites. Nick Land's wife is Jewish. Oh boy. Okay. Though violence is celebrated as the preeminent tactic, they're willing to endorse non-violent means as well. Accelerationists have proposed distributing flyers for racist rallies alongside ones for a counter-rally to stoke social division and create conflict. They suggest you should always vote for the most radical candidate in any election, regardless of their position on the political spectrum. One poster I saw even heralded Barry Sanders, a Jewish socialist, on the grounds that... Yeah, okay. Yeah, but I don't think this... Like, while accelerationists, there might be some accelerationists that advocate this, I don't think this comes out of accelerationist theory necessarily. I think that it's sort of on the periphery. In their view, any sort of increase in social tension is good. See, again, I don't think... Okay, we're going to take a moment here. And we're actually going to open up the Great Replacement. And we're going to find his definition of accelerationism. Look, you go Excel... 2 mentions. One, he says that gun rights are going to be accelerated by what he's doing. The other is that accelerationism, it's all about stability and comfort being the enemies of revolutionary change. It's far better to encourage radical violent change regardless of its origins, strictly to encourage radical social changes. So he's basically, at this point, although he's already admitted that yes, accelerationism has deep theoretical or non-theoretical roots in French cybernetic theory, going back to the CCRU and all these dense theories that I'm not going to read, at the same time, accelerationism is whatever Brendan Tarrant wrote in that meme manifesto that he uses the word once. Like, you're giving so much territory to the enemy here. Like, it'd be like finding like the craziest Christian cult and then being like, oh, they must be the true interpreters of the words of Jesus, and we need to shut down the Catholic Church because we found some crazy, splinter. We read the Westboro Baptist Church's signs, and now we need to stop Catholicism. Like, it's just so way out to left field from accelerationism, but that's what he's working with. Apparently, that's going to be his definition. Fucking meme manifesto. In their view, any sort of increase in social tension is good as long as it accelerates us towards system collapse. And individuals have an obligation to do whatever they can to hasten us along this path. Even, or more precisely, especially, committing murder. I would be willing, as one Fascist Forge contributor put it, to use all resources possible for accelerationism. Why are you letting Fascist Forge... You're giving so much ground. I'm so confused. Like... what is I've never even been on this website. Is this a popular alt-right website or something like that? Fascist Forge? Are they just trolling this journalist? Like I've seen journalists do this where they'll go onto a community and be like, "Hey, I'm writing something for this journal, like I'm this sort of journalist or whatever. Do you want to give me an article on this?" And there's been some very hilarious articles that have come out of people taking advantage of that in the past. Atomwaffen are feds for sure. I couldn't tell you, that's for sure. What's that? Were we making fun of articles they read? Yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing way past future. We're making fun of the most recent article they wrote on accelerationism without any research. I feel like the author listened to podcasts on the war on everything. I haven't listened to those podcasts, but that sounds painful if they could be inspirations for this, I have to say. Vox is a psyop. It's psychological warfare. So there's a lot of people thinking this is all psychological warfare. I personally think it's people who can't read theory. I was talking about this on Twitter the other day. I seriously think it's people who they pick up Fang Numina and they crack it open and they say, I don't understand any of this. And then they crack open Fascist Forge and they read what some dude wrote that literally hasn't even cracked open Fang Numina, and they go, oh, I get it, this must be what accelerationism is. Like, if I can't understand this first stuff, this second stuff that I can understand, it must just be the explanation for the first stuff. That's my take on it, but theory is a psyop. Yeah, that's a more plausible explanation in my eyes. The whole thing, it's a Burroughs conspiracy. Language is a virus. It's all planned. The thing about accelerationism today is that it does not require any organized plot or group to lead to mass murder. These sentences are the ones that accelerate. Like, from the beginning to the end, it's just like, they just ramp up. Holy cow. Okay, accelerationist justifications for violence have suffused online white nationalist spaces to the point where anyone can encounter it and draw their own murderous conclusions. I don't know. I don't spend enough time on white nationalist spaces. Maybe they are all... Maybe if I open up Fascist Forge, I'm not going to do it. But maybe if I do, it's all just threads on accelerationism. Like, maybe this is something I should look into. They're honestly starting to make me question, like, maybe there is these deep underground websites that no one's ever heard of, or at least that I've never heard of, that as somebody who thought they knew something about accelerationism, and all they do is talk about accelerationism, and they have a whole separate theory on race accelerationism and how they're going to overthrow the system through mass murder. If someone's got a link, send it my way because I'm interested. There's an entire subculture of individuals who are promoting this concept, who advocate for sabotage and destruction against the system. Oh, this is the Anti-Defamation League person again, the person who already said that they don't know what they're talking about. It only takes that one individual who's inspired by that rhetoric on the message board to act. Which, again, they're tying back to Mason. Okay. Brendan Tarrant's motivation was a mix of hate and fear. Like all contemporary white supremacists, he believed non-white population growth was an existential threat to his race. His manifesto type, The Great Replacement, was a term coined by a French writer, but in context refers to the theory of white genocide by demography that goes back decades in the white supremacist movement. Tarrant's plan for stopping white genocide drew liberally from accelerationist ideas. He literally titled a section of the manifesto Destabilization and Accelerationism Tactics for Victory. Now, we just looked at this, thankfully. That is the only time he ever says accelerationism in the entire thing. Acceleration, or accelerate, is used once, also. So I guess if you're looking for, like, all words from the root of accelerate, he uses it twice in a 74-page manifesto. Is that a liberal? I don't know, maybe. Liberal, I mean, it's almost ironic. Why did you carry out the attack? To add momentum to the pendulum swings of history, further destabilizing and polarizing Western society in order to eventually destroy the current nihilistic, hedonistic, individualistic insanity that is taking control of Western thought. The change we need to enact arises only out of the great crucible of crisis. So again, this is just he's now doing it explicitly, that he's defining accelerationism by what he read in that manifesto. When before, again, he skipped over talking about Fang Noumena, he skipped over talking about the CCRU, what they were actually talking about when they talked about accelerationism. He mentioned them, that's where the ideas started, skipped over talking about those actual ideas, and have now defined it as what he read in the manifesto. Yikes. It's difficult to overstate the influence of Tarrant's attack and manifesto on the internet's racist right. The Christchurch shooting claimed 51 lives, one of the deadliest white supremacist terror attacks in modern history. The sheer violence on the assault on New Zealand's small Muslim community turned its manifesto into a must-read on the racist right. Is it? Again, I don't know. I'm totally disconnected from the right. So, or at least like these alt-right neo-Nazi circles and stuff like that. Is it a must-read? It's not well written. He's not a very intelligent person. Like, it's quite clear on that one. And I'm like not even anything like political on that. Like it genuinely reads like he doesn't have a very complex grasp on the English language. He doesn't seem like the type of person that was coming up with very interesting big brain ideas that would be radically inspirational. But again, please, if someone has these links to these accelerationist, deep, dark, alt-right, white supremacist links, hook me up, please. Atomwaffen was a relatively insular universe. When the Christchurch shooter starts describing this, it makes a big jump into the wider consciousness of white supremacist movement. The Southern Poverty Law Center, Bierich, says. That clear statement of accelerationism in the Christchurch shooter's manifesto took this to another level. Now pretty much everybody on the radical right has read this stuff, imbibed this stuff, and he put it into public domain for white supremacists. But again, his definition of accelerationism is just terrorism. It's just using violence to destabilize society to try to get your political goals through. So if you're trying to say that like he's introduced the far right to terrorism, that's a very hard sell for me. In April, about a month after Christchurch, a man named John Ernest entered a synagogue in Poway, California, and began firing on worshippers. At one point, Ernest explicitly borrows a clearly accelerationist idea from Tarrant's manifesto, the idea that using a gun in an attack could hasten the state's collapse by stoking conflict over gun control. So this is what they call a clearly accelerationist idea. It seems very, very fringe, weird accelerationist idea to me. Again, they very well could be a right-wing movement that is trying to do these things under the name of quote-unquote accelerationism, which they basically just define as terrorism. I mean, sure. Maybe. Again, please, I wish they had some sources here, because I read this manifesto. I didn't sell me on it. So if you're going to just keep quoting the manifesto and these shooters that didn't talk about accelerationism, you're having a really hard time selling me. Give me the quotes. Give me the real links to these deep underground Atomwaffen theories. I'm interested. I really am. Not as like just in an intellectual sense. I want to know if I'm wrong. Several months after Christchurch and Poway, a third white nationalist named Patrick Crucis shot up a Walmart. Oh my God, they're just constantly going back to just like different attacks and how these different attacks might be accelerationist because they shot people. It's tricky to definitively say that accelerationism caused Blaze Bernstein's murder in... yeah, okay. Other acts of Atomwaffen violence, or the 3 white supremacist mass shootings of 2019. There's always a complex web of personal relations for why an individual chooses to kill. It's possible they would have turned out violent regardless of what ideas they were exposed to. The influence of accelerationism is clearer in some of the killer's writings than in others. Crucius's manifesto in particular doesn't seem too indebted to the theory. I feel like they're just like playing, like, having said that, having said that, accelerationism is a diffuse idea, and it's best to think that of its influence as such. Neo-Nazis didn't need accelerationism to be violent, but rather the doctrine's omnipresence in online far-right spaces. Again, omnipresence. Really? Makes it more than... he's making me doubt myself at this point. Like, am I this blind to these massive, omnipresent, far-right spaces, accelerationist spaces? The frequent expressions of support for violence increase the baseline risk that someone turns to it. As late as Dylan Roof, the 2015 Charleston, South Carolina shooter. There's so many shooters, Jesus Christ. The reaction of the white supremacists was kind of ambivalent. Atomwaffen is not the only organized group promoting accelerationism. The other groups whose ideas fit the doctrine are the Bowl Gang, a small group of online propagandists who lionize Roof, the Base, a transatlantic neo-Nazi umbrella group that explicitly aims to turn online chatter into real-world violence. So I guess, are these the omnipresent groups they're talking about? Atomwaffen, the Bowl Gang, and the Base? Because, again, I've heard of Atomwaffen, not these other two. These groups have largely moved beyond web forums like Iron March, Fascist Forge, and now shuttered 8chan. You can find their content on social media platforms like YouTube and Twitter. Are there a lot of Atomwaffen content on YouTube and Twitter? Again, I wish they had some sources for these things, because unless I just go around searching, maybe that's what I should have done. I should have read this article last night and just really tried really hard to try to find as much like online racist accelerationism as I could, like white supremacist accelerationist stuff I could find. Because I feel like I'm almost underprepared for him just like constantly throwing out these unsupported accusations of these massive online accelerationist right-wing groups, and I'm just kind of scratching my head going like, maybe? Not that I know of. The real hubs of accelerationist activity are secure messaging platforms like Telegram. Really? Someone's got to give me the hookup to the accelerationist telegrams. Damn. Telegram, the one that like you have to give your phone number to. That seems like some, at least Discord you can be anonymous. Apps that are harder for law enforcement to surveil. Well, again, you have to give your phone number. How is that hard for law enforcement to surveil? And easier to keep free of outside influence. Journalists and professional hate watchers have gotten access to their channels, but it's impossible to know exactly how many are operating outside of anyone's view. Oh, so is this are they gonna literally say that like he can't even see them? Like they're so hidden, even I can't see all these right-wing accelerationists. They're everywhere and they're invisible, and I know they're out there. I can't find them. They're so deep on the Telegram channels. Bearing federal regulations like weakening the encryption protections for these platforms, a proposal that raises serious privacy and data concerns. It may not be possible to effectively keep tabs on what accelerationists are saying to each other and what they're planning. White supremacist violence tends to come in waves, with high-profile killings typically inspiring copycats until... Oh my god, I'm so sick of this, like, discussing the alt-right and then just, like, rapidly, like, switching back and forth to, like, talking about accelerationism like it's actually the same topic. Accelerationists instinctively understand that their statements and actions can rapidly reach a planetary audience. They are exploiting the speed of life under late capitalism to spread hate to the masses, a dark parody of the techno-capitalist singularity posited by... A dark parody of the techno-capitalist singularity posited by the CCRU theorists in the early 1990s. What? Okay, let me read some chat while I'm trying to process that one, because that seems like again, another just way out there claim. Land calls terrorist attacks tantrums. Yeah, that's a good point. Goes on poll once, yeah. Try looking at hashtag accelerationism on Instagram. There's some posts from neo-Nazis in there. Okay, that's a good place to look. Most people on the right disavow the idea of accelerationism, viewing it as immoral or wrong. They want society to collapse. Others want to hasten the idea of government to shock people. Nick Land actually recently came out against Kent Capital and the prohibition of incest. Um, I forget what he called it, but he's very much against that article now. So again, that's why it's sometimes really hard to talk about Nick Land, because like you can't really, like, if you're talking about one period of his life, he may completely disagree with what he said in another period of his life. As accelerationism leads to de-accelerationism, journalists thought the CCRU was utopian. Yeah, I'm again, like, some of these takes that this journalist has are so kind of out there. It's starting to make me question, because he's not even citing it. It just like he's saying it like it's just like, oh, everyone knows this, and I'm going like, am I retarded? Like, I'm so confused. Yeah, Lance said that on Twitter. He said something about how it's I can't remember. He quoted his own article and then like said anyone who would write this is an idiot, basically, which I thought was really, really funny, and I hope he does more of that. I want him to do like a full dissection of Fang Numina and just like explaining why he's wrong. That's my great hope in life. Okay. Okay. Let me try to read this sentence again. This really hit me. Accelerationists instinctively understand their statements and actions can rapidly reach a planetary audience. They are exploiting the speed of life under late capitalism to spread haste to the masses. Why would they call it late capitalism? That seems like such an anti-accelerationist phrase to use. No? Like, explicitly anti-accelerationist. To call it late capitalism. Anyways, to spread hate to the masses, a dark parody of the techno-capitalist singularity. What does he think the techno-capitalist singularity is? Like, I mean, it's not a bad question. What is the techno-capitalist singularity? But in this sense, when he's using it, what do you think he's actually trying to say? Because alt-right memes being a dark parody of the techno-capitalist singularity out of the CCRU is so bizarre to me. Like, incredibly bizarre. I'm trying to process that one, and I don't think I'm going to get through it. Okay, we got to try to get through it. We're almost at the end. Power through here. Oh, Lord. In our correspondence, Nick Land told me that the assumption behind accelerationism was that the general direction of techno-capitalist self-escalating change was towards decentralization. It seems that this was partly correct, but in a far more horrifying way than anyone at the time could have anticipated. That's it. Okay. Far more than anyone at the time. As he's saying, like, in the 90s? Because I'm assuming this correspondent was recent and not before all these attacks. Holy cow. Okay, so okay, let me just try to debrief from that whole debacle. So he's basically saying accelerationism is an alt-right or a white supremacist ideology that's going to cause violence. And then he says that accelerationists actually were, the CCRU theorists in the early 1990s, ideas which I'm not going to deal with, I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to even mention, basically, other than just to flippantly sort of reference them. Then I'm just going to say that, whatever's happening now with this awful alt-right definition of accelerationism that I've come up with is just somehow the inverse of the CCRU's theory, like a dark, the yin to its yang or something like that. No one could have seen that it was inevitable that the CCRU was going to cause right-wing terrorism with these ideas of accelerationism. What? Yeah, okay, so that's actually a really good point, Robert Kusk. Yes, I do totally agree. Deleuze is really hard to wrap your brain around, and so it's hard to fault journalists for not understanding, the accelerationist theory. But what gets me is then they don't understand accelerationist theory, and at the same time pretend like they've discovered some secret. They've connected the dots, right? They've done they've done the work, and they've uncovered this deep underground conspiracy in the alt-right movement towards accelerationism. And I feel like if you can't even read accelerationist theory, you're probably not in any position to like be the person that discovers the deep underground conspiracy theory of accelerationism, right? It just seems so. I can't understand A. I can't understand B. I'm just going to believe what B is saying is describing A. Even though if you read A, you'd realize that actually has nothing to do with B, right? It's. Oh my god. Okay, so that was my take on the article. I'm sorry I had to put you all through this. You know what he should do? If there were sections cut out by chief editors, he should just personally release them, like a more full version. If he thinks that will, that'll be a more accurate or a more full take on accelerationism. Because as it is right now, like there would need to be some big sections cut out to walk back some of the weird assertions made. I'd like to see it though. If he could do it, I'd encourage it because he's been getting a lot of flack. I can see. One was released in guest chat with McKay on TW. Oh, cool. So yeah, I think ultimately, if I'm going to sum up this whole thing, I think that the movement towards assuming that accelerationism is an alt-right conspiracy, it comes down to a very unfortunate kind of anti-intellectual bent, which just demands that your understanding, of a concept, it doesn't really matter whether it actually corresponds to reality. All that matters is if it makes sense to you, right? If you don't understand something, it's not that you don't understand it. It's just that you haven't read like a dumb enough take on it to really understand it. But eventually you'll read a dumb enough take that you'll get it. And then at that point you understand everything and you don't need to read all the other stuff that you don't understand. And it's not just a Vox thing. I think it's much more broad. He's talking about shortcut to race war. Who's talking about Tarrant? Tarrant seemed to be the one talking about shortcut to race war. But is that what he thinks accelerationism is? That maybe that's what it is. Just any sort of any shortcut. Anything that makes anything happen sooner, Oh, it accelerated it, so therefore it's accelerationism. If Zach Beauchamp, if he ever watches this video and you want to come on live stream and talk a little bit about accelerationism and how, because I honestly I hope I wasn't too uncharitable in this video, because there were some points where I genuinely was going like, maybe I'm wrong here, maybe there is some alt-right conspiracy I'm missing out on, and if you want to come and tell us, and actually point this stuff out, I'd really love to hear it. Yeah, please. This is like a this is just like a 1K live stream. This doesn't have to be about the article. So ask me whatever you want. Go for it. He stands by the article as published, eh? Oh, okay. I think I saw something on Twitter about him. There was a section on left acceleration of ALAC that got left out or something, or cut. But again, I don't see how a section explaining left accelerationism, I don't see how that would paper over the there's just so many assertions that weren't supported, and so many people are going to read this and then just assume, well, if they're just unsupported assertions and he doesn't need to cite it, it must just be common knowledge, right? How old am I? I'm in my mid-20s. The last thing he seems to have said was, I'm talking to you to make sure I understand. Well, that's the thing. Like, Land does have some tweets that are pretty racist and anti-Semitic. Like, I'm not even gonna try to defend Nick Land as like, oh, he's perfect. He's never done anything problematic. I mean, that's far from my position here. My take is that like accelerationist theory and Nick Land's shit posts are, you can probably separate them a little bit. Hopefully, at least. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, whatever, I'm totally free to answer them. Yeah, I went. I did a double major in philosophy and political science, so I do have a degree in philosophy. Oh, well, accelerationism. I mean, I guess that could be taken two ways, right? Accelerationism, from its general standpoint, is that capitalism is the motor of modernity, and therefore the idea that like capitalism is going to collapse soon is sort of, it's something more on the revolutionary Marxist sort of side of it. Um, like the idea of late capitalism being that like capitalism is inevitably going to come to an end soon, whereas I think a broad swath of accelerationists would agree that a capitalism as its as a historical tendency is going to outlast humanity. But if you are thinking about like left wing, specifically Marxist accelerationists, yeah, they probably very well could use the term late capitalism without contradiction. So I shouldn't be that glib. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's one of the funniest things about um, sort of like the Marxist idea of history, which I consider myself a dialectical materialist. I'm very sympathetic to it, but people are so convinced that this stage is at its end. Like Marx was convinced, Lenin was convinced, Mao was convinced. Like all throughout, all the big communists were all just convinced that they were right at the very end of capitalism. So it's funny that late capitalism as a term is already so old. Like it already goes back to I don't know what it is, 19th century, 1900s, somewhere around there. But yeah, if we are in late capitalism, like I don't see those cracks coming to fruition anytime soon. 1840s. Okay, I don't actually know the history of the word or the term. Yeah, I'm actually gonna write something on this. I've kind of written some stuff, um, kind of peripheral to it, but I think that dialectical materialism, specifically communism as dialectical materialism, it actually fits really well with the ideas of accelerationism. But it's a very roundabout a very roundabout sort of way to get there, mostly through Zizek. So it's not a very It's a very unorthodox reading of dialectical materialism. Have a good night. Thank you for joining me. What do you think about the fact that the current mode, capitalist business as usual, will essentially lead to the end of complex civilization? Think about the fact that the current complex civilization. Is that a fact or is that just a hypothesis? I mean, like, I think again, it's one of those weird things. If we constantly think the end is here, right? We have thought that capitalism was, either going to destroy us or be destroyed for more than 100 years. It just still keeps going. Can't kill it. Or maybe you can, but if you can, I mean, like Marx's like the socialist project, and I think this is one of those reasons why like I'm a very unorthodox communist. The socialist project was a total failure. Like according to materialist conceptions of history, if you look at socialism, it didn't work. It basically ended up being a crutch for capitalism, And now we look at socialism. It's Norway and Canada and Sweden and countries that are totally integrated within the capitalist society. So I mean, I think that the idea of socialism, like revolutionary socialism, is antithetical to communism, which is again part of the reason why my take on dialectical materialism is so weird. Hello, Sparrow. Thank you for joining me. Is it possible that they're... Okay, sorry. Just trying to catch up with comments here on chat. Land describes techno-capital as a movement towards self-affirming space. That sounds a lot like Nietzschean will to me, kind of like Shelley describes in plants. Now it's possible there are other phenomena which have similar movements, power structures. Yeah. Actually, I think that... there's a lot of talk about, like... will, either through Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, but I think also a really interesting kind of thinker to tie into that would be Spinoza. Spinoza has a lot of ideas of this sort of he's often considered a determinist, right? But it's such a weird version of determinism because he wrote a book called The Ethics, right? It's not just determinism as determinism, it's like determinism which isn't finished or something, determinism which we're still working on, something like that. So I think that is a really good idea, and that Nietzsche does have a lot to say about that, and Spinoza too, which is someone I'd like to do a video on one day. Ecological collapse is external to capitalism, so different from traditional inherent collapse. Any thoughts on Zizek's ontological incompleteness? Yeah, okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on Zizek's ontological incompleteness, and I think that's a lot to do with sort of how I can tie, or how I've tried to tie, dialectical materialism into accelerationism, because the idea of sort of these non-human processes, which, like the big thing, Zizek's whole kind of controversial statement, right, is that Marx is too idealist, and that to make Marx more of a materialist, we need to go back to Hegel. And one of the reasons why he says that is because Hegel is quite clear that in dialectics, like, philosophy comes too late. You can only philosophically understand something when it's already dying. There's this weird idea that he says the owl of Minerva only takes wing at the setting of the sun, something like that. Only when ideas are coming to their end are they able to be understood philosophically. Whereas Marx had quite a clear idea of being able to predict the future. I mean, not explicitly, but this idea of we've determined the movement, and now we can see what's coming next, and it's going to be socialism, and we're going to have a proletarian revolution, and this is how it's going to happen, yada yada yada. And I think that by removing that, by turning it back into a sort of indeterminate or retro-teleological process, which doesn't have a head, which doesn't have a big other, which doesn't have something at the other end. I think that actually fits quite well with accelerationism. What's my background anyway? Education-wise, I have a degree in philosophy and a degree in political science. Unconditional accelerationism would delete welfare and the protective state. Left acceleration is welfare for humans to protect us from the machine. I mean, everyone disagrees in those labels. Yeah, I think accelerationism is descriptive rather than prescriptive. I mean, there are definitely accelerationists that have prescriptions to give you, but I don't think that as sort of like a critique of as a way to understand modernity or capitalist processes or whatever, I don't think it's prescriptive necessarily. I'm currently reading Heidegger. Any thoughts on him in relation to accelerationism? Yeah, the audio is only coming out of the left ear, Sparrow. I don't know how to fix that. It's my first live stream. I don't know how to fix that from OBS's side. So if you can switch your audio to mono, that'll fix it. Otherwise, enjoy me in your left ear for the moment. So I think Heidegger's one of those thinkers that I've engaged with, and I don't know if I've ever come to a full grasp of. I have a friend who's much deeper on Heidegger than me, who I've talked to about this topic before. And so much of the issue with Heidegger is, it's a lot like, any of the phenomenologists really, in that like you kind of need to get within their system to understand what the hell they're talking about. You can't really approach it from the outside. It's virtually impossible. Heidegger, I found that especially because he was like making up his own terms while he was going. But I think that there's probably some stuff in there for sure, especially like in his letter on technology, with technology like being something which comes to inframe our action rather than our actions sort of inframing themselves, and technology becoming its own ends, I think, is something that Heidegger was quite prescient about. Oh, I see. Sorry, Amir. Yeah, I think Land, he's quite open to the idea of there being a motor to modernity that isn't capitalism. He just doesn't see it. Like he's said before, something like, if someone were to prove, or if there's a political revolution in the future, or movement in the future that proves that this same level of societal and technological change can be upheld without capitalism, then he's totally fine with that being true, with Elac being right, that there's a motor outside of capitalism. But he doesn't believe that explicitly, in the sense that he doesn't see it actually happening. But he allows the space for it to be a possibility, I guess. And somebody like, for instance, Mark Fisher was quite explicit that he thinks that capitalism, although it did at one point provide this great accelerative potential, that it's actually starting to work in the opposite way, and it's actually starting to impede production and stuff like that. We're seeing things like monopolies and canceled futures. That there may actually be a point where capitalism needs to move aside in order for accelerationism to continue. And no, I don't think Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. I don't think that's a surprising take from anybody at this point. You know, Mark Fisher had a great line once, something like, "What is often seen as conspiracy theory is actually just class solidarity among the bourgeois," basically. And I think he's very true and very real in this sense that what appears to be a massive conspiracy, it's really just class conspiracy. It's just a bunch of rich people protecting their ass. There isn't people like they're so quick to jump to things like secret societies running the world, and it's so easy to just assume that rich people have too much power and they cover it up. And like stuff like Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, as soon as he died, everyone just kind of stopped talking about it. It all just turned into like, oh, I wonder where his estate's going to go. I wonder if the money's going to get given out. It's like, okay. Let's not turn this into a Jeffrey Epstein stream. What exactly does Negrestani bring to the table with regards to accelerationism? Seems like capitalism is a tool of Tellurian insurgency against solar imperialism. The Earth is sentient. IDK. IDK. I'm still trying to wrap my head around Negrestani. I started with Cyclonopedia, and I have such a hard time, like processing how much of this I'm actually supposed to understand and how much of it's supposed to be kind of out there. Because I think, obviously the fiction and theory fiction, it's supposed to play a role. It's not all supposed to be just standard theory, but I'm kind of in the weeds at the moment with Negrestani. Once I finish Cyclonopedia, I'm going to get around to it. I'm about halfway through. I'll finish it, and then I'll read Intelligence and Spirit. And by the time I get to the end of Intelligence and Spirit, I'm hoping I understand what the hell he's talking about. Oil demons, etc. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm getting out of it right now. The dust is the sentient byproduct of the Middle East that contains information from cosmic, all the standard stuff. In the universe, Cyclopedia. Cyclopedia is a manuscript given to somebody. Whether it's a suicidegirl.com model, maybe that's a twist. You just spoiled it for me. Fisher said that capitalism was stagnating accelerationism through things like I could bring up Terminator versus Avatar. It's actually he has quite a good critique of land in that, and he's basically referring back to Deleuze, because that's pretty much what Deleuze was saying too, in a weird way, was that the process of deterritorialization, in order to continue, kind of needed to escape capitalism. That what at first worked to deterritorialize, it actually reterritorializes on the other hand. And he would point to things like monopolies. He was really big on music. He thought that the sort of crazy potentials of music through all these new technologies and stuff were being capped by capitalism. They were being redirected into nostalgic roots that didn't actually push things forward, but instead served as a basis of nostalgia. So I think that would be his main critique of capitalism, is that it functions, or it has come to function around nostalgia and sameness and centralization around monopolies and stuff like that. Whereas at one point it was this strictly decentralizing force. I mean, just look at the internet, right? The internet in like the 1990s was this radical potential where everything was, you could do whatever. Anyone could start a website and put whatever they want up there. Now, not so much. There's sort of like social media. It's these very few major conglomerates that control the space. YouTube is almost totally controlled by corporate interests at this point. And if your content doesn't suit their interests, it'll be banned from making money. So I think that Mark Fisher, he makes a good point. whether he's, I don't think capitalism, if he's right, I don't think capitalism has fully hit the point of stopping deterritorialization. Like, it hasn't stopped. It's still going. Um, but if it is starting to tend back towards, the more phallic, arboreal, top-down sort of structures, I mean, yeah, who knows? Uh, State accelerating idea. There's a sorcerer's part, I think. It's the introduction part. There's a sorcerer's part, I think, then the meat of the book. So, yeah, in the introduction, there is this weird thing where he's talking to somebody who, they don't actually have a name. They go by, like, a symbol. Whether that was... I don't know who that person is. But the nice thing about it, or the part that I really appreciate it with it, is they actually continue talking to that person identified by a symbol through, like, the footnotes of the book. And, so whether that actually goes anywhere, whether it reveals who that symbol, who that represents or whatever, I don't know. Land also talks about stratification and reterritorialization. I don't know how closely Fisher read Early Land. Fisher and Early Land were like, they spent a lot of time together in person. They knew each other very well. Like, basically what... Here, let's just pull it up, because this is one of my favorite articles. I think I have it right on the front page here. This is Terminator vs. Avatar by Mark Fisher. Okay, yeah, so it's right here by the end. While Land's cyber-gothic remix of Deleuze and Guattari is in so many respects superior to the original, his deviation from their understanding of capitalism is fatal. Land collapses capitalism into what Deleuze and Guattari call schizophrenia, thus losing their most crucial insight into the way that capitalism operates via simultaneous processes of deterritorialization and compensatory reterritorialization. Capital's human face is not something which it can set aside, an optional component or sheath cocoon which it can ultimately dispense. The abstract processes of decoding that capitalism sets off must be contained by improvised archaisms, lest capitalism cease being capitalism. Similarly, markets may or may not be the self-organizing meshworks described by Fernand Braudel and Manuel de Landa, but what is certain is that capitalism, dominated by quasi-monopolies such as Microsoft and Walmart, is an anti-market. Bill Gates promises business at the speed of thought, but what capitalism delivers is thought at the speed of business, a simulation of innovation and newness that cloaks inertia and stasis. So, I think that's actually a really potent critique of Nick Land, if not like one of the most potent critiques of Nick Land that I've ever read, especially because when you read something like Antioedipus, how schizophrenia is twinned with paranoia, and paranoia is something that doesn't actually become too theoretically developed in Nick Land's work, at least not in the Nick Land that I've read so far. And I think that that's probably a sign that he maybe is overlooking some of the aspects of Deleuze's theory that possibly could have been fleshed out a little more. Because I think Deleuze says something like, I'm quoting from memory here, obviously, what is deterritorialized by one hand is reterritorialized by the other, and it's done in such a fashion that you can't tell each hand from one another. So with Land's whole focus on schizophrenia, that schizophrenia is also paired with it's schizophrenia like paired with paranoia, and they work in tandem in this sort of twin pincer movement, right, to reinforce themselves and to push the thing along. And I think Deleuze thought that deterritorialization was winning, but to just then kind of ignore the paranoiac, aspects, to ignore the more reterritorializing aspects that come inherently with deterritorialization and with schizophrenia. I think that's actually a pretty potent critique. But at the same time, I don't think that his take on, capitalism providing thought at the speed of business as being sort of a negative is necessarily like a thing. Like, I don't think we've had anything faster than that so far, and I still don't think we have a good alternative to that if what we're looking at is how to advance society or advance the deterritorialization of society the fastest. If that's even... See, this is a whole other thing about accelerationism. Is it even proper to accelerate things? Should we be trying to accelerate things? Like, we kind of very quickly jump to this idea of, oh yes, capitalism, deterritorialization, all this kind of thing. Therefore, it must be a good thing. Which, who knows, I mean, I've always kind of looked at it as a weird, almost like a quasi-Gnostic kind of thing of like, that there's this false god, who we can see as almost guiding material conditions, and in that sense, the Gnostics were very suspicious of a false god guiding material conditions. So whether you just want to find out how to deterritorialize things the quickest, I mean, I don't know if that's the best idea, or whether, deterritorializing things the most consistently or the most efficiently, or like maybe there's other takes. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna go back. I keep rambling and I'm missing all these good questions. If I missed a question, you can ask it again. I definitely just missed it. Yeah, Nick Land's the notes at the back of Fang Numina with the spine and stuff. I have no idea what any of that stuff's about, and the brackets and the notation and stuff. I'd love to figure it out. I'm gonna read Spinal Catastrophism, is that how you say it? Eventually, and hopefully that'll have something about spines that I can, tie together with it. Yeah, I'm thinking my live streams, if I do more of them, if you guys like these things, I'll do more of them for sure. They basically just be reading theory. I mean, that's all I'm good at. I think I'm gonna do a video on Terminator vs. Avatar, and I'm gonna get more into the idea. He has these three controversial statements. Everyone is an accelerationist. Accelerationism has never happened, and Marxism is nothing if not accelerationist. And I actually agree with these quite a bit. But I think probably to get into it, I'd need to I'd do a bit more deeper of a dive into it. But I think that what he's saying when he's saying everyone is an accelerationist, it's not necessarily saying that like everyone would stand up and say I'm an accelerationist, but rather that the sort of ideas that we all kind of come to accept in today's society, they're the same base premises that accelerationism works from. And that's one of the reasons why accelerationism was always so interesting to me, was that how would I put it? The premises it starts from are not radical. The conclusions it leads to of this crazy transcendental AI capitalism sort of thing, those are way out there. But the premises that it starts from are pretty basic. They're pretty simple, they're pretty digestible, and they're ones that pretty much everyone would agree with. So you can almost like reverse work people at least into agreeing with the premises of accelerationism quite easily, most people. And you can also see that, I think, in some sense with how broad accelerationism is as far as praxis goes and stuff like that. I mean, there's Marxist accelerationists, liberal accelerationists, right-wing accelerationists, Apparently, there's even white supremacist accelerationists out there on some forums I haven't read before. So it's not something that limits your it doesn't have such a strict set of premises to start from that it limits your conceptual framework very much. It's quite open. I need to read more Bataille. I haven't actually read The Accursed Share. I've read some of his shorter works. He has a really short work on materialism that is absolutely brilliant. But I'd hold off on that question until I've read a bit more Bataille. It basically comes down to an idea of his radical nihilist sort of anti-humanism, as far as I know. Looking at society through as inhumanist of a lens as you can. He had a lot of stuff on like limit experiences, which was all about like transcending reality through extreme experiences and stuff like that. And I think you can tie that into like his quest for the outside pretty easily. Nick Land's quest for the outside, should I say. If paranoia and schizophrenia synthesize, we're in Hegelian territory. Oh boy, watch out. RAC mostly wants to prevent the acceleratory process from dissipating. Yeah, I would say it does, but it has a pretty specific way to do it. As opposed to UAC, which is pretty much like it wants to prevent the acceleratory process from dissipating by any means necessary. RAC has pretty territorialized sets of like policies that it wants to see enacted to get that done. Sorry, Amir. What the normative statement are you bringing into this? I'm kind of jumping around between like what different groups think, like LAC and RAC and stuff like that. I think accelerationism is pretty descriptive. Yeah, I think Lily Patchworks makes a really good point here too. Is that like while accelerationist theory at its most pure and literally ideal might be purely descriptive, like there wouldn't be LAC and RAC if this wasn't politicized, if there wasn't actual political motivations intertwined in it, and there wasn't praxis and all that sort of stuff. So it's when I say that accelerationism is descriptive, not prescriptive, I'm not trying to say that like there are no accelerationists that will tell you what to do, because that's totally wrong. There are a bunch of accelerationists that have a bunch of ideas on what to do, and they all tie that into the theory, right? So, or try to. Yeah, I think Jacob Martinson makes a good point here about how there is a kind of weird sympathy to the Vox article in that take that everyone is an accelerationist. It's a different kind of point to it. It's not pointed towards something like white supremacy, but rather towards something like I don't know what you say. Sorry. Something like accelerationism as being, again, the premises I think are very easy for people to accept. It's the conclusions that those lead to that people have a very hard time swallowing. So I think that it is quite easy to say, well, sure, yeah, these people are accelerationists in the sense that everybody accepts those premises. But in the degree, like, would all those people stand up and say they're accelerationists? Like, I doubt it. I think it's the amount of people that would stand up and say that they are an accelerationist is still quite small. It's still very fringe. Quick take on what the priest is in Deleuze. Oh man. Oh geez, that goes into like the more anthropological stuff in Deleuze, which was not the parts of of him that I understood the best. I don't have a very deep background in anthropology. I haven't read Strauss or anything like that. Um, I need to read that again. If you want, I can give you a better answer. Like if I do another live stream, I'll do some research. I'll give you a good answer for that. But I don't even have the book in front of me right now. I'll leave that where it is. Oh, if we should accelerate things, yeah. So I think, and that's kind of like my personal take on it, right? Because so many people, they see accelerationism as a descriptive theory that says that things are accelerating, and then they just sort of inherently assume that that there's some moral aspect to it, or a descriptive aspect to it, that therefore it's the right thing to do, or that we should do it and we should work towards it. But I think that, like, you shouldn't jump into praxis that quick, because the descriptive side of it doesn't quite tell you what's right. It's an egg. Yeah, that'll be my answer. The priest is an egg. Any other interests except accelerationism? Like philosophically or just in general? Philosophically, yeah. I'm into dialectical materialism. Communism was quite a big thing in my intellectual upbringing. A very philosophical take on communism, not a very political take on communism, for whatever that's worth. For other philosophical interests, Kant was always really big for me. Hegel is someone who I've been getting more and more into over the last couple of years, through Zizek. Zizek, another one of my big philosophical inspirations, I think. As far as like non-philosophical interests, I'd say like film is a really big one for me. I'm really into film and literature, stuff like that. This channel, it was going to be like a film and philosophy channel, basically, where I was going to take bad movies and do really deep, like, philosophical dives on them. But then I started doing a video on, I might actually publish it at some point, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it. But I started doing this one video, it got way out of hand, and then in the meantime, I started releasing like some other videos just to get some subscribers before I released the big video I was working on. And then this whole accelerationist thing got all caught up in it, so yeah, it was going to start off as more like philosophy and film, this channel, and then it became what it was, or what it is. The best way to contact me, if you're just have a question or whatever, probably the best way, yeah, you can post it right here and I'll do my best to answer it. But if it's one of those questions like the one about the priest, right, that I just don't have a good answer for off the top of my head, how did you skip over Anti-Oedipus and HP? I talked a lot about Anti-Oedipus, did I not? Oh, you mean in the time series? Okay, sorry, I won't skip Chuckle's question. If you're looking to contact me, you can. The easiest way would probably just be give me $1 on Patreon and get in my Patreon server. I'm there to answer whatever questions you got. So why I skipped over Anti-Oedipus and ATP in my Act series was I was strictly focusing on the idea of time and intensity and virtuality, and I think those are better explicated in difference and repetition. There are some good takes on it in Anti-Oedipus, and I 1,000 Plateaus is something I need to read in more depth before I really give more takes on it, I think, because I've only kind of skimmed it. But yeah, I think difference in repetition, it gives a really good, clear breakdown of intensity and virtuality and his theory of time in relation to how it came out of Kant. And I think that was more useful than to just focus on the more accelerationist focused stuff like Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus. Yeah, I agree. And I eventually, like, it's on the list. I just have so many things that are very important to accelerationism that I've been reading, and that's kind of like part of this series, right? Is it gives me an excuse to kind of like study some of this work and read it in depth and write something on it. So it's this series is for my own benefit too. You know, this channel helps me study this stuff too. I'm not like some expert on accelerationism, by the way, any more than anybody else who starts making accelerationist content on the internet is. Like, I just have a degree in philosophy, a BA in philosophy. It's not like I'm Robin McKay or one of these giant thinkers in the field that are actually quote unquote experts. I do have a particular interest in Huxley, not really an accelerationist interest. I think that Brave New World was one of those, as it is, you know, when you're becoming coming out of young adulthood or late teenagehood, that you read it and it's like a revelatory kind of experience, much more so than 1984 was for me. And ever since I've kept reading him, it's always been good. So he's not like a foundational thinker or anything. It was just a random name to throw on the channel, basically. I have no idea about accelerationism in academia. I would think it would be a good thing in the sense that it's kind of hip and new, and you know, if you're just kind of trotting out the same old ideas, it might be kind of difficult to sell your thesis or whatever. But then again, I don't have a whole lot of experience with like late academia, so whether it would just be better to sit down and do it on some boring, dusty old rereading of Kant or something like that. Maybe that would be the best way. I really don't know. I don't think it's on its way to die. I think it's going to become more and more important, actually. But whether it's going to become kind of persona non grata, I don't know. I don't know. Like, articles like this, like the one we looked at, they make me worried about the future of accelerationism, what people are just going to come to assume are its theoretical underpinnings and stuff like that. But again, maybe that's one of the reasons why it's going to become more important in academia, because if these things are considered important, then we're actually going to need people that understand where they came from and how they actually don't quite fit together in the way some people might think they do. So I think we spent a bit too much time to get into Meltdown, but that just gives me an excuse to do another live stream, I guess. So we'll do this again. We'll get back together and we will talk about Meltdown. We'll read some theory. And if you guys have any other ideas for like stuff you want to read on the live stream, or stuff you want to see me do a video on, or you just want to ask me questions or whatever, send me or send me $1 on Patreon. It'll get you into a Patreon server where you can ask me whatever, give me critiques and stuff like that. What do I do if I'm not in academia? You know a lot for BA. Yeah, I was one of those like nerds who made the dean's list, and then I got out of academia, and all I did was just keep reading theory. I didn't like slow down really at all. I kind of just like kept studying just sort of on my own. And again, it was mostly like Zizek and communism and Hegel, and then I started reading Nick Land, and that led into Deleuze, and that led into Baudrillard, and it kept going from there. So I only have a BA, but I think as far as like reading goes, I've probably read enough for to qualify as above just a general BA. But at the same time, like, a lot of the stuff that I've read, I've come at it from such a weird side perspective, coming at it from accelerationism, you know. I don't know how much of my research would fit into academia. I'm basically a huge nerd. That's just what I'm trying to say. All right, I guess I'm going to wrap up the live stream here. Thanks you guys so much for being with me, and thank you for helping me get to 1,000 subs. It blows me away. Every time I see it, I kind of like do a double take. Like, really? There's this many people who will listen to me ramble about dense, continental theory. Going for a grad degree in the U.S., focusing on any continental thinker after Heidegger, really Nietzsche equals bad idea. Yeah, I have a friend who went for in Canada here. He went for a master's degree with Heidegger, and it didn't quite play out. How fast do I read? I feel like everybody else says I read really fast, like the people that I know, but I feel like I read really slow. A dense work of theory will take me like forever. I've been reading the Phenomenology of Spirit for like a year, like not like full time like reading it the whole time, but like just on and off for so long, because it just takes each passage just takes me forever to get through, and it's not for any other reason than like I'm just genuinely really interested in it, and I'd rather try to understand each passage rather than skip over it, which actually slows things down quite a bit. Yeah, I'm gonna upload this live stream. You don't have to worry about that. And I do have a job. I'm working more than full time right now. I do most of the work on my YouTube videos between like midnight and like 2-3 a.m. So it's one of the reasons why this stuff's so slow. It's because I'm working a lot just to pay bills. Read ATP or go out and commit accelerationist violence. I tell you, it's on the list. It's on the list. It's getting done. And it's not like I haven't picked it up. It's on my shelf. I have definitely opened it and read through parts of it, but I don't like saying I've read a book unless I've actually sat down and like gone through it cover to cover. So, yeah. What do I like by Baudrillard? Right now I'm reading, I started off with his System of Objects, and I have been reading, and I'm looking to finish soon, his Symbolic Exchange in Death, which has been really, really good. I've been really into that. And then I'm going to finish it up by reading Simulacra and Simulation, which is also on my shelf. I know that's the meme book that everyone reads, so I really wanted to read it, but at the same time I wanted to have more of a background on his early work before I got around to it. So Conspiracy of Art. I'll put that on the never-ending list. I haven't read Spengler, no. Strangely, like, never really been something that came up as far as my studies went. I've definitely heard the name a lot. I know some of the ideas, but no, I've never sat down and read them. Will you do a video on the alleged connection between the alt-right and AC? I mean, I guess this was it. I don't know how much more time I can spend on these takes. They're so... you can hear the pain in my voice just talking about them. They hurt. Yeah, libidinal economy, that's another one that's on the list that I've read parts of, but I haven't actually sat down and read cover to cover that I need to do. Deep dive. Oh, lordy. Okay, if that's what people want to see, that's what people want to see, and it'll get done, but it wouldn't be my first choice for a video, that's for sure. Spengler goes well as a contrast to Deleuze. That's cool. Yeah, like I say, I haven't read pretty much anything by him, so I couldn't say. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up, guys. Thank you so much for being with me. And yeah, if you like this live stream, let me know. I'll do another one for sure. Well, it'll basically just be this. It would just be talking about theory and chatting about random stuff. So if you're into that kind of stuff, let me know. Thanks again for subscribing and supporting the channel. You're awesome. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say. Like, I don't even know how to express exactly like I'm doing a live stream for 1,000 sub count. It's something that I never would have thought I'd do. I have watched the Distributists take on Moldbug. I actually think I gave that video a shout out in the rundown, just because I don't know all that much about Moldbug, and so one of the like main engagements I've had with Moldbug was watching that video for sure. Alrighty, guys, have yourself a good one. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully I'll see you again.